Right, so welcome to my video on proportional relationships. Believe it or not, we've actually done proportional relationships before, but we just never called it that. So now we're just kind of introducing some new terminology to an old concept. So a proportional relationship is an equation, graph, or table where one variable is always a constant value times another variable. So as an equation, this would look like y equals mx, where m is your slope, which we're now calling a constant of proportionality. And as a graph, this equation will also pass through the point 0, 0, and the constant proportionality is y divided by x, which is really similar to the concept we learned before when it came to learning a linear equation. And finally, as a table, the constant of proportionality can be found by dividing any y in the table by its corresponding x. So I'm going to go through 3 different examples and a word problem with you so you can get a little bit more comfortable with this topic. So to find the constant of proportionality from a graph, we can look at any point on the graph and then divide its y value by its x value. So on this particular example, I chose this coordinate, and I look at the y value, which is 30, and I divide it by the x value, which is 5. So 30 divided by 5 is 6, which means our constant of proportionality is 6. To find this from a table, we can take any y that doesn't equal 0 and divide it by the x that matches. So as long as neither of these numbers are 0, we're okay to do this process. So here I have a y that's 12, and the corresponding x that goes with it is 3. So I do y divided by x, or 12 divided by 3, which equals 4. So my constant of proportionality is 4. Perhaps the easiest way of looking at a constant of proportionality is by looking at an equation. These equations are always in the form y equals mx, where m is the constant of proportionality. So for example, in the equation y equals 6x, the constant of proportionality is 6. Thinking of a word problem as a fraction. So for example, if you want to know miles per hour, you'll put miles as the numerator and hours as the denominator. So for example, if you went 120 miles in 6 hours of driving, how many miles would you go in 1 hour? And in this case, we would say 120 miles divided by 6 hours, which is the same thing as 20 miles divided by 1 hour, or 20 miles per hour. So in this case, the constant of proportionality is 20. So now let's do a couple examples from your homework just to kind of show you how this works. So on these slides, we have tables, word problems, equations, and graphs. So looking at my tables, I do the table method, which in this case, we can look at it by splitting my screen and going to where I had my table. So I would take one of my y's and divide it by one of my x's, but neither of them can equal 0. So let me zoom in really quickly on this. So let's look at my y that's right below the one that has a 0, which in this case is 3. So you would do 3 divided by 4, which as a decimal happens to be 0.75. Now let's look at a word problem, for example. So typically when it comes to word problems, it really depends on the context that makes the most sense. So for example, Jenna often babysits to earn extra money. On Friday night, she made $42 for babysitting 3 hours. So typically when you think of it as what makes the most sense? Hours per dollar or dollars per hour? Typically, we're going to have hours in the denominator of our fraction or the bottom of our fraction. So we can do 42 divided by 3, which in this case is going to equal 14. So our COP is 14. Perhaps the easiest method is equations. Here we see that our constant of proportionality is right in front of the x, and in this case, that would be 7. And finally, we can look at a graph, take a coordinate, and divide its y-axis by its x-axis, or in this case, 1 divided by 2, which 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. Now, for this entire homework assignment, all you have to do is find the constants of proportionality for each one and match them up with their correct graph. So, for example, let's take a look at our graph where we have the constant of proportionality of 0.5. Up here, I notice that this graph also has a constant of proportionality of 0.5 because I did my y divided by my x, which is 1 divided by 2. So when I find out that two different problems have the same constant of proportionality, I'm going to copy that and paste it onto the sides of my graphs. And then all you have to do from here is just match it up so that it roughly fits right next to it and do the rest of the problems. You should have a graph, a table, a word problem, and an equation that all have the same constant of proportionality. Hopefully this helps, and if you guys need any more help, just let me know by emailing me.